All right. Thank you. I'm so excited to be here and get started and talk a little bit about when customer success is a second class citizen. And we've got a lot to cover in the next half hour, so I'm going to go ahead and jump in. But just really briefly before I do, I wanted to share that today I'm bringing this content to you from sort of two different perspectives. And one is, as a customer success leader, I'm an entrepreneur, and in every company I've founded or run, customer success has been a function that's been under my responsibility. And I actually started out my career in what we would call customer success today. So it's very near and dear to my heart, and I've personally lived it, both myself as an individual contributor and running teams of many people. But also I have a different perspective on the outside, which is as a SaaS business advisor to founders and customer success leaders and other revenue leaders. And today I'm an operating partner at Arthur Ventures. At Arthur Ventures, we make investments in B2B software companies that are outside of Silicon Valley. And in my role as an operating partner, I work with our go-to-market teams inside of our portfolio companies, often working with customer success. So I'm definitely going to be talking today about things I've seen on the inside as well as things I've seen on the other side as well. So let's jump right in. How can you tell if customer success is a second-class citizen inside of your company? Number one, you can just feel it. And many of you today might even be here because you feel it. And that's something even me as an outsider can sometimes feel right away. And it's hard to explain why, but it's just something that you perceive and feel. But there are other really more qualitative or quantitative markers as well, or symptoms of being a second-class citizen. One is that churn is considered a customer success problem, and it's kind of referred to like that inside the organization. Another that can be insidious or hard to spot, but is there, which is when customer success is sort of an afterthought, whether it's in strategic planning or key decisions that are made that are impacting your customers and the customer base, or even in cross-functional communication. You might have leaders that are communicating, but customer success doesn't have a seat at the table. And this kind of phrase, having a seat at the table, is one you'll hear me refer to often in this session. Another symptom of being a sort of a second-class citizen is struggling to get resources and funding and staffing. So you're always sort of stretched too thin. You don't have the right tools or processes or things that you need to really run a world-class customer success organization. And then the biggest one is when net and gross retention is not a shared KPI. And it kind of gets to that second bullet, this customer success, churn being a customer success problem. We see that often when net and gross retention is not a shared KPI. That's probably the number one symptom. So I'm going to give you a little bit of tough love. And remember that I'm giving this to you both as somebody who has internally worked inside of companies, being responsible for customer success, as well as externally advising founders and customer success teams. And my tough love is that it's not them, it's you. So I hope that rather than be demoralized by this statement, it's something that we can go through this content together today and you can feel empowered by, because I do believe that you can change this dynamic. And I've seen it happen oftentimes with really simple fixes. So I know it might feel like a mountain to think about how will I elevate customer success inside of my organization, but I'm hopeful that we can give you some tips and tricks. And in some cases, I've seen this turn around pretty quickly. But let's talk about the root causes. Why is it not to them, but you? The first is being in a reactive state. We are customer success. We're often bearing the brunt of things that have happened outside of our control. So we do live in a reactive state. We often also communicate in anecdote-based communication, which is not the way the rest of the organization communicates. And we'll talk about that in a few minutes. Lack of strategic cross-functional relationships are definitely a root cause of this. Ineffective managing up. No line of sight for leadership. So not providing the information to leadership that they need, or not providing it in the way that they need. And then a concept of learned helplessness, which we'll talk a little bit about at the end as well. So these are really what I come in and see a customer success organization that isn't elevated to where it needs to be. These are typically, you see sort of a combination of these root causes. And again, I've lived some of these even myself, especially in sort of lacking strategic cross-functional relationships. So there's 5 ways you can change this, and it's working laterally, being proactive, the way that you're communicating and what you're communicating, thinking data first, and then managing up. So those are really the 5 keys that I see of things that we can change inside of customer success to help us elevate the function of customer success in an organization. And I'm going to dive right in to working laterally, which is working cross-functionally with other departments to meet the company's strategic objectives. And it's really about working with your peers that are leading other functions. Now, here's the thing. Customer success won't be taken seriously by leadership if you're not working laterally across the organization with your peers. And one thing I see a lot of is that actually customer success doesn't have peers. And so this is quite common. There's a VP of engineering, there's a VP of product, there might be C-level executives, but there's not a customer success or customer ownership kind of role that's at that same V or C level. So oftentimes it's not as simple as just go make some relationships with your peers if you might not have peers. That's a big symptom of sort of customer success not being elevated to where it needs to be. But there are things that you can do to build lateral relationships. And you can choose to start, if you don't have peers, there's not a sort of if there are people in other functions that are much higher than your highest ranking customer success person, you can either start higher, right? You can go to the VP of engineering and try and do these things. And if that's not something that's appropriate or you feel like you can do, you start with the directors, start with those who are your peers and start to work yourself up that ladder of sort of the roles. But here's the thing. First of all, set up regular meetings with engineering, with product, with marketing and sales, just to have, hey, this is what I'm working on. Here are my key initiatives. Here are the challenges I have. Here's some of the opportunity that I see. Just start to have regular peer-based relationships with other functions. Doing some pre-planning with departments. So trying to kind of work your way into, if the company does strategic planning and you're going to get some targets to hit or something, don't just go off in a sort of corner and say, how am I going to hit that number? Try and reach out again and meet with your peers and other departments to say, how are we going to meet these company objectives? So that's an important one, right? So kind of taking shared ownership or trying to create a culture of shared ownership around initiatives. Another one is to understand what's important to other departments. So just like we often in customer success don't feel understood and people don't understand how what they do impacts us and our role and our customer base, I think sometimes we fall victim to that as well. So it's important to understand what is important to other departments. How are they measured? What is sort of how are they tracked? What are their KPIs? And then to use that information to demonstrate the value of customer success by providing insights or information or some type of help that helps them meet their objectives. And when you start to create that culture, it can really change the dynamics of how you're viewed inside of the organization. And by you, I mean customer success, not you as an individual. And so that's really important. Just find ways to add value, find ways to help. And then, if that's going well, hopefully you can find some cross-functional initiatives to collaborate on together. And then number one thing I see that helps is to ask for support, to say, to be open about, hey, I don't feel like customer success has a seat at the table and other functions do, or hey, I feel like customer success needs to be inside the room when we're making decisions that impact customers, and see if you can gather some lateral support for somebody to help you kind of carve this out and pave the way for you and with you. And that can be just asking for support can be pretty transformative for sure. Of course, you know this, but I always have to say it. Avoid finger pointing, blame, and defensiveness. This is not easy because, again, we're often in customer success. We are bearing the brunt of things that happen outside of our control. A bug was released. We have to clean up the situation with the customer base and put out the fires, right? It's often sort of imposed on us, the things that impact customers that we then have to take care of. And we really have to change our dynamic around this when working laterally and working with peers, and never, ever come off as finger pointing, never come off that we're blaming, and never come off that we're defensive. It just is something we have to fundamentally change in order to create healthy, strong, positive, peer-based sort of lateral relationships. So super important. And just to give you a sense of what does great look like, joint initiatives to increase NPS or retention or expansion, whatever it might be, right? That working sort of cross-functionally to do those things together. And if you are not getting the support at the leadership level, again, find peers, ask for support, and find peers that are willing to take on joint initiatives with you. Open, frequent lines of communication, a feeling and a culture of shared responsibility for the customer base. And you can always tell when there's great peer-based lateral relationships is when there's this sort of culture of like, we're in this together, we've got each other's back. So don't wait for somebody else to create this culture. If you don't have one, start to carve it out today and take those steps. So that's the first thing you could do to start to change the perception of customer success inside of your organization. Let's talk now about the second thing, which is being proactive. And there's a trick to this, but proactive just means creating or controlling a situation by causing something to happen rather than responding to it after it has happened. Now, we all know in customer success, we are often in a place where we have to respond after something has happened. Again, that's just the reality of our role and what we do. But we have this choice, which is to be reactive about it. Or the number one thing you can do is create the perception of being proactive. It's just a little bit of a Jedi mind trick, but I believe that a customer success needs to be the calm in the eye of the storm. So even if we don't feel it, right? Even if there's been a crisis and now we've got hundreds of customers upset or up in arms or experiencing friction, or something's happened and maybe we're concerned it's introducing churn risk, whatever it may be, we have to be the calm in the eye of the storm. We have to be, hey, we've got a playbook for this. Hey, this is a crisis, but we've got this. We know what to do. And I understand we don't always feel like that, and that's okay, but we have to create the perception that we've got this. This is very important. Oftentimes when I see customer success not elevated to the place that it should be inside of the organization, I see these behaviors that feel very reactive, feel very defensive or blame-based, or just feel like, the world is on fire. Because in customer success, I think you often feel like the world is on fire because, it might be, but I think it's super important that you create the perception of being proactive and being the calm in the storm. We've got this. Now, there are other things you can do as well. Post-mortem and learn from every fire drill. And do this in a way that doesn't do finger pointing, right? You don't want to, if there's, let's say, a big bug, something happened, now we want to do a post-mortem. It's not, hey, don't do any more bugs. Don't release any more bugs because it causes customer success a problem. Instead, say, what can we do when this happens? This is what we can do to respond well. And so post-mortem, learn from fire drills that we've got, and then communicate the learning and the action plans out across the organization or to key people. So that's a really great way to show that you're proactive. Another one is just make sure we live so reactively in customer success. I think any customer facing role does, that we need to stop. We need to stop ourselves and say, we have to undertake strategic initiatives. We can't always be in this reactive state. So undertake some strategic initiatives to improve an onboarding process, or to introduce some new renewal plays, or to increase a certain, usage or adoption problem that you've got. So undertake strategic initiatives, even little ones, and make sure you're communicating those out to show this is not just a reactive organization, but we are proactive as well. And then you want to share reports and data on a regular cadence, which we're going to talk about here in a minute. So that is it. But I think you can be more proactive, even though it feels often that we do live in a reactive state. And I think the start of that is act as if, right? Give the perception, be the calm in the eye of the storm. So let's talk about number 3, which is communicating, and how to kind of communicate out broadly across the organization. So I'm only going to spend a minute on this one, but what we want to do is make sure that we are communicating, reports and insight and data. We want to talk about wins. We want to talk about, expansion wins or an at-risk save. We had a customer that was at risk of churning, and we saved them. We want to talk about adoption challenges that our customers might be facing, and then challenges we have. It might be around growth or scale or certain segments of the customer base, but we want to be communicating this out to the organization in a regular cadence. So what that looks like is, sending out an all staff monthly email, right? Say, here are some wins we had, here are some challenges. I like to send out, did you know customer insights? Did you know that 10% of our customer base is in this industry? Did you know that 5% of our customer base, got time to value within 2 days? Whatever it might be, like always sharing tidbits. First of all, this builds empathy for the customers, and it creates a voice of the customer, regular sort of cadence and culture inside of the organization. But again, it makes you look more like a strategic partner. It makes customer success look more proactive. So sending a staff sort of roundup about customer success and what's going on in the customer success world can be super helpful. And now there's sort of like leadership team communication. And one thing, people oftentimes when I'm coaching customer success leaders on this, they say, well, that's not really our culture, or, well, leadership's not asking for this information. And I believe what we have to do is be sending it anyway, right? If leadership's not asking for this information, that's a symptom of a situation that we want to try and change. So the way that we do that is we don't ask for permission, we just do it. So to the leadership team, have a set of standardized monthly reports that you send out to them. And it can be, again, wins, it can be expansions, it can be a post-mortem on losses, being open and honest about that, about trends or, gross and net retention. I love to share health scores and trends around those. This percentage is red, yellow, green, et cetera. Different at-risk intervention plays that you might be running. This postmortem on losses, I want to just highlight. There's a lot of fear in customer success around churn, right? I'm afraid to talk about it oftentimes, especially in organizations where customer success isn't elevated to the level it needs to be. There's a lot of just fear of like being transparent about churn or churn reasons, or even things we could have done differently in customer success to try and save a customer. And I find that just openness and honesty and vulnerability around that can really change the culture of how customer success is viewed. So I think postmortems are very important to say, hey, we looked back at the last 18 months with this customer. And here's all the things that we see. And by the way, here's a few things that we should have done. We should have intervened differently, or we should have caught that. I think being open is very important. So postmortems can be important. And, depending on the size of your customer base, you may be postmorteming every loss, or just maybe picking a couple, but I think it's important to do that. And then to share out like a quarterly business review. We're in customer success. A lot of us do quarterly business reviews for our customers, but to do them on customer success as a function and as a department can be super helpful. And again, sort of show leadership the strategic importance of customer success inside of the organization. And then something I find that helps too is like just sharing customer success industry information. Take a great blog post from the Churn Zero blog and share it. And when you do that, do it with a summary, right? So you have to remember, if you're communicating with leadership, they don't have a lot of time and attention for us. So you don't want to just randomly send over an article, but you might want to say, I really got a lot of value out of this article, and I wanted to call out this point that they made. So you share the article, but you kind of summarize other, industry stats, information, things like that. So great communication is, communicating with staff, certainly communicating with your peers. We already talked about that, and communicating with leadership, even if they're not asking for it. That can be super important and very, very helpful. Okay. Probably of all 5 keys to changing the perception of customer success, this one might be my favorite. Customer success in any customer facing function is a relationship driven role. It's a relationship driven department. We have to learn how to tell the story of those relationships with data. And I love this quote. I found it on a blog. Product teams mostly want to develop a product that customers will love, but they feel that most of the feedback that they receive from customer facing teams is anecdotal. I hear this so often. I hear leaders of other departments say this about customer success. I hear sales say it. I hear, well, sales does it too, right? I hear products say it. I hear engineering. I hear leadership. I hear finance say this. This is a common refrain about customer success. It's so anecdotal. So how do we do that? We say things. We don't think these things matter. We're just talking. We're talking about customers. We're talking about things we're hearing on the phone. We say things that seem pretty innocuous. Nobody likes how we handled that last feature release. Everybody's been asking for the XYZ integration lately. We've got a bunch of new expansion opportunities in the pipeline. Churn's increasing this quarter because of COVID. So what we need to do is be thinking 25 customers churned last month and mentioned COVID as one of the reasons. That's the example of how to change that kind of phrasing. So what we have to do is sort of fight our natural instinct and be thinking fewer anecdotes, more data. And the analogy I always give is that like data, facts, reports, that needs to be the meat of your communication, and your anecdote and stories need to be the salt and pepper, right? Salt and pepper makes the steak delicious, but you're not going to have a meal on salt and pepper. So when we learn as customer success leaders to communicate with data and facts and use fewer anecdotes, it can really dramatically change the perception of customer success inside of an organization. And I've seen this many times because many people in the organization don't communicate with anecdotes and stories, right? Finance doesn't, executive leadership often doesn't, product doesn't, engineering doesn't, and we do. And that's that's who we are. That's like true to our nature and our role. But to effectively communicate in a way that's received, we have to try and change that a bit. So data, facts, reports. The headline here says tell your stories with data, but it's really tell our customer stories with data. And what data that is really depends on your organization. And I like to have sort of all of this and more, but you've got to select the data. But days in onboarding, time to first value, churn reasons, not we've got a bunch of churn coming because of COVID, but hey, of our 100 customers who churned last month, 25 were because of COVID, 25 were because of this. So churn reasons and sort of the numbers behind those reasons. Same thing with expansions, right? Why are customers expanding? Customer feedback, maybe working with a support leader to sort of share, the responsibility for support tickets and trends and things like that as well. And customer feedback might be gathered in surveys and things like that, but also we have customer success on the phone with customers, right? So we tend to hang up the phone and share a story. And instead what we need to do is say, hey, a lot of customers are talking about this. Everybody team, let's start tracking it. Let's hang up the phone and rather than say everybody wants this integration, let's just start tracking the integrations that are mentioned so that we can share data to the organization around that. So the feedback, I'm talking about the feedback that we get in our normal course of business where we're communicating. I'm not talking about survey-based feedback, although that's great too. But even the feedback that we're hearing on the phone can be tracked in a sort of quantitative way. Same thing with feature requests. And then always customer health scores, both the percentages and the trends around that are very important. And customer segmentation data, again, hey, 25% of our SMB customer segment is using XYZ feature. Great information to share. So whatever data, you need to tell your stories is going to be unique to your organization, but it's important to find those stories to tell. Okay, number 5 is managing up, and it's making your boss's job easier by managing your manager. That's technically the definition of managing up, but I think it's less about managing up directly to your manager and more around just managing up across leadership and across peers or leaders in other departments if you don't have an equivalent peer. So just thinking not so much even about managing up to a person, but managing up to sort of the next level of leadership inside of your organization. And to me, managing up to leadership just means understanding their cadence, how they work, how they communicate, what their priorities are, what their strategies and goals are, and then finding ways to fit customer success into that worldview that leadership has, right? So the number one thing you can do here is, and this is a dynamic I see that we can really shift, I see it a lot, which is that customer success isn't the source of truth. So what happens is customer success is being told information about customers or about the customer base, or they're being asked for it versus the customer success is proactively sharing it, right? So you want to be proactively sharing churn reasons versus being asked for churn reasons, as an example. So be the source of truth. Inside of your organization, you might need to be the source of truth for gross and net retention. In an ideal world, like BizOps or finance owns that. But if they don't, be the source of truth, right, inside of your organization around those numbers and what they mean and what the numbers are, and things you're doing to impact those numbers. But churn reasons, ARPU, or average revenue per unit, which is average unit revenue per customer. Again, days in onboarding, NPS, customer health, whatever the data is. Don't be asked for it. Be proactive and think about what does the organization need to know about the customer base, and I'm going to share that. I'm going to be the source of truth, or our department is going to be the source of truth. So that's really important, is to start to think, how can we as customer success be the source of truth about our customer base? And again, if your organization is not yet mature, it might be that you're actually the source of that data. And if it is more mature and you've got things like BizOps, finance, different departments you're working with, collaborate with them, but you want to be the source of truth if you can. And then there are just simple tricks for managing up, right? Communicating the way that leadership communicates. A lot of times, leadership is quite, concise. There's a lot of brevity in that communication. I see sometimes customer success organizations, and I'm guilty of this, so I'm not finger pointing. A lot of times we're very lengthy in our communication. And so we're maybe sending 5 paragraphs and leadership's just trying to skim it to get to the meat of what it is so they can move on to the next thing. So see the style of your leadership team and how they communicate and try and adapt your style to that somewhat. Proactively providing the reports, the plans, the insight, being that source of truth. Surfacing churn risks is a big one. I'm going to put a pin in that, come back to that in a minute. It's worth calling out. Providing those churn postmortem learnings. A lot of tension around churn can be diffused by just saying, hey, we lost this customer and here's what we learned about it. And we looked back again. So that's really important. Identifying problems and trends and ideas worth discussing that impact the customer base. Just be cautious to not do that without offering up solutions or ideas as well, right? When we bring a problem up or we say, hey, I think I spot a problem or an opportunity, make sure you're ready to have solutions or ideas. And then making sure you're just aligned on expectations and measurements. How is customer success measured? What are the expectations of the customer success organization? That can be a big help. So surfacing churn risk, that third bullet, I want to talk a little bit about that as well. But this goes into it. It's really important with a lot of the sort of fear that can come around churn. It's just, and again, coming with we are often dumped on. Let's face it, we're often dumped on in customer success. I'll just say it, right? Things happen that impact us, impact the customer. We have no control over it. It's our fault, or it's our problem. We have to pick up the pieces. We have to never be defensive, even when we're frustrated, and not to, sort of complain to leadership. It's important to be the source of opportunities for improvement and not to be the source of just complaints. Also avoid surfacing everything, and avoid surfacing problems without ideas or solutions, and avoiding fear as much as we can. So let's talk about this. A lot of times, especially in founder-led companies, there can be a little bit of a toxic environment around churn. And that is because founders take churn very, very personally, right? It hurts. So one thing I've seen is sort of like a churn happens, or maybe a spike in churn happens, and there's kind of like this just explosion of energy and attention and emotion on customer success, what's going wrong, like churn happened and it's your fault. And it's just going to create a really tough environment to navigate. And what I have seen is there is always a way to avoid this. And the way is to proactively communicate churn risks and churn intervention plays. I've never seen it not work, so it's never failed. So what we move into is, rather than responding to, let's say, a flare up around churn, where we're back on our heels and we're defending ourselves and we're, trying to explain things that, already happened, is what we have to do is we have to start to share these things in advance. Hey, there's 100 renewals next quarter, and 10 of them look like they could be at risk because of X, Y, and Z. And this is what we're doing about it. That one thing can change the whole dynamic inside of your company around churn, which can disseminate the fear around talking about what's going on in customer success, which can change how you're behaving inside of your organization, which can change the perception of customer success. So it's very important to not be afraid to talk about churn risks and to proactively share them. Because first of all, churn is not our fault, right? Churn is a shared responsibility across the organization. And the best way that we can show that is to be talking about churn well before it happens, and to be sharing the things that we're seeing and the things that we're doing around it. So that's my number one tip. If you're living in that type of environment with any of leadership or with your founders, my number one tip here is to change the dynamic by getting in front of it. So that's that one. Okay, so 5 keys. We jammed a lot in. We went through them quickly. Working laterally, that's where it starts. Being proactive and creating the perception of being proactive, communicating across the organization, thinking data first, so fewer anecdotes, more data, and then managing up. And those are our 5 keys for changing the perception of customer success inside of an organization. But there's one more key, and this is maybe the most important one. And that is this concept of breaking out of learned helplessness that I mentioned in the very start of this presentation. So learned helplessness is like a biological, psychological thing that happens when people think that situations are beyond their control. And what I see a lot of is customer success not elevated where it belongs inside of an organization, and a customer success team feeling like there's nothing that they can do to change that, right? To say, we've tried, we don't have a seat at the table. We'll never have a seat at the table. This is the way it is. And this concept of learned helplessness stops us from trying to change it. So the number one thing that you can do to change the perception of customer success inside of your organization is to work hard to change your mindset and the mindset of your customer success team. And it's silly, you can do it, but it's true, right? This is within our control. And even if it means that it's not an overnight solve, we still have to try. We still have to elevate customer success to where it belongs inside of the organization, which is at the same leadership level as product and engineering and sales. Without a customer, there is no business. And so we have to change this. And what I would say is, try and try and try again. If you try something and it doesn't work and it falls flat, try something else. Try something differently. But keep trying. So the number one thing we can do is act as if, right? Act as if customer success deserves a seat at the table. Act as if customer success does have a seat at the table. That alone can change how the customer success organization is perceived inside of the organization. So that is it. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed sharing all of this, and I'm looking forward here to questions in a few moments as well. So I am just going to go ahead and jump in. I know we've got a lot of questions and only a couple minutes left. I want to let you know that if we don't get to your questions, we'll definitely be following up to answer them and reaching out afterwards. So one of the questions that got a lot of votes was, what suggestions do you have to promote more joint shared goal philosophy? It feels like sales, CS, and marketing feel collaborative, but product feels like it's on its own island, and leadership doesn't view it as shared initiatives. This is a great question. I'm not surprised it got 7 upvotes, because I see this all the time, right? Somehow product is over in this kind of engineering bucket, and it doesn't touch customer success or sales or marketing, and that's a really hard challenge. One thing I've seen is teams get really creative about, again, building those lateral relationships with other people inside of the product organization. So not starting with the VP of product or the CTO or the whoever leads engineering, but starting with your actual peers, right? A product manager who wants to share and collaborate and have joint initiatives. And so if you kind of think about spreading out a bit, that can really help. So just think about lateral movement versus going up or trying to change the dynamic too much. And it does definitely take time. So that's what I would start with, is just find peers who are open in the product organization, who want to learn from customer success, who want to hear data, who want to collaborate. And these can be baby steps, but if you do enough of those baby steps and create enough of those lateral relationships, it can start to change the culture inside of the product organization. But that is such a good question and so common for sure. Another question that got a lot of votes was, what suggestions do you have? Let's see. Oh, there's so many questions. Sorry, guys. Can you share some examples of successful joint initiatives across departments that have helped to increase NPS or retention or expansion? Yeah, I can think of a lot. And one of them is usually something that gets done with the product organization, but I think one of the sort of go-to ones for me is increasing high-value feature adoption. So when I look at-risk customers, a lot of times it's because they're not adopting the highest value features, so they're not using our differentiated features, whatever that might be. And so if we think about things that product can do to increase and drive, users towards those high-value features, or change how the user experience is of those, and then on the customer success side, we can be running cadences to essentially be promoting those features and sending out messages to the customer base and calling and talking about that feature and why it's valuable, helping customers adopt that feature. We can even get marketing in that boat too and have them working on customer marketing around that. So you can kind of think about, like, I think about high value features a lot, right? Because if I get somebody using the highest value feature, they're less likely to churn. And that's a product marketing, customer success, and product joint initiative, which ultimately increases retention for sure. Okay, let's see. This one's got a lot of votes. When dealing with leadership and corporate boards, have any specific metrics bubbled up as the most impactful to share? So that's a great question. So definitely, boards want to know why people are expanding. I know I mentioned it in my talk, and it's a big one. We forget to talk about that. We kind of track churn reasons, let's say, but we don't track expansion reasons. And a lot of times there's great opportunities in there to accelerate something that we're doing and drive even more expansion. So I think tracking the quantitative data around expansions as well as churns. And I will tell you, I take a very rigorous methodology around doing churn analysis and sort of the reasons and the notes and everything like that. So I think that, along with this customer, sort of just churn data, close loss reasons and things like that, are the most important. And then things like the NPS score and customer health. So I think that I might be done and it might be over. Let's see. Yes, I'm done. My time is over. So many great questions, you guys. Thank you. I wish I could have gotten to every one of them. And sorry, I had a little delay getting in here to answer your questions, but we will follow up. And thank you so much. I hope you guys are all having a great day at this fantastic event.